Yeah, thanks for trying to make it look like it's sort of
I'm just going.
Okay.
This is the way I like it. We've got one for well,
Why?
I want to. John.
great.
I've gone through this so many times, I should know it. I changed my title just a little bit.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the final session of the conference. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing William Wise Weaver, but first I want to thank all the organizers. I'm sure you agree with me, from the Grand Valley State History faculty, Dave Beaton and Jason Cup-Hamill, and Sean O'Neill, and in particular Peter Dobek and Nathan Kapura, both of whom I think are the visionaries behind this conference on the history of sociability and the ability to stream it live through YouTube. So thank you very much. Thanks for all the hard work you've done. Thanks to Dean Jennifer Drake as well, and the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences for their tremendous support. And it's our pleasure to thank them again too as well. So to introduce William Wise Weaver, a pioneer in the field of food studies, and as such, an expert in culinary history, anthropology, culinary arts, food ethnography, and material culture, amongst other things. His scholarship is interdisciplinary. He crosses various intellectual dividing lines, working both inside and outside academia. He is a doer as well as a scholar, growing heirloom vegetables and testing historical recipes himself, often using equipment from the period. Trained as an architect, Dr. Weaver has had a hand in historical preservation. He has worked in the publishing industry. He has taught at Drexel University and the University of Pennsylvania. He's curated exhibitions and consulted on documentaries. In short, Dr. Weaver has a wealth of experience and knows quite a bit about a lot of things. He's even an accomplished food photographer. To give you a sense of his academic and literary accomplishments, he earned a doctorate in food studies from the University College Dublin, Ireland in 2008, the first such awarded. His range of interest is evident in the 20 books he has written and edited, including books on foodways. For example, As American as Shoe Fly Pie, a food lore and fake lore of Pennsylvania Dutch cuisine, in which he explored the phenomenon of Pennsylvania Dutch cuisine, supposedly drawn from genuine Amish recipes and traditions, such as the 7 sweets and 7 sours, presumed to identify an Amish table, but in fact a fictional cuisine, manufactured by tourists seeking restaurant tours, journalists accentuating local color, and cultural revivalists judging authenticity by size of portion rather than authenticity. And I should point out that you can purchase this book outside in the lobby, as well as some of Dr. Weaver's other works, if you're interested, and I think a lot of people will be. His other works include the cookbook Pennsylvania Dutch Country Cooking, a finalist for the James Beard Award, Heirloom Vegetable Gardening, a Master Gardener's Guide to Planting, Seed Saving, and Cultural History, which has just been revised and reissued, a revised edition of Maria Dębinska's Food and Drink in Medieval Poland, rediscovering a cuisine of the past, and most recently, Flavors from the Garden, Heirloom Vegetable Recipes from Roughwood. As you can see, Dr. Weaver has a wide range of expertise. He's rooted in the local, tending a garden with thousands of varieties of heirloom vegetables at his home in Devon, Pennsylvania, a restored 1805 tavern, and active in grassroots organizations devoted to regional foods and GMO-free agriculture. He inherited a large collection of heirloom seeds from his grandfather, H. Ralph Weaver, which has blossomed into a great national resource, the extraordinary Roughwood Seed Collection, representing over 5,000 varieties of heirloom food plants His work is transnational and his perspective cosmopolitan, as evident in his current projects, which include a study of food and drink in medieval Cyprus, and in the research he will be sharing with us tonight on the European roots and profound communal and spiritual implications of the humble pretzel. But please join me in welcoming Dr. Weaver.
Thank you very much for lingering on to hear me speak today. I'm really very, very honored to be here. And you guys are really hospitable. You've treated me very well. My first time to be in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So it's been fun, and it's been a great learning curve for me. I'm going to sort of waltz slowly through my lecture because I don't talk from notes. I want to be able to make certain that some of my images are very clear to you. So I'm going to stop and explain things as we go. The basis for this particular presentation goes back to 2011. I gave my literary agent, I have an agent, Lisa Eckes, she handles food studies and that kind of thing, a book proposal on the, what I called at that time, the social history of pretzel. I realized, coming from Pennsylvania, or Pretzelvania, if you want to call it that, that the story was wrong. I knew that it was wrong, but I wasn't quite sure exactly how off this food myth had wandered. So she submits this book proposal to several publishers. Oh, they said, we can't use this. It's too scholarly. We want pretzel recipes. And so I told my agent, I said, that's not the book I wanted to write. So I sort of put it on the back burner because I realized what was going on here is that I had really two books that were slowly unraveling into their own entities, if you will. And one has to do with the origins of the pretzel, and the other book has to do with the real social history of the pretzel. And they're two stories that are intertwined, but they're very separate. And I've kind of brought the two together here tonight, just to hit the highlights as we go. The other thing I want to, so you're going to see a mixture of images relating to those two themes. If I may say, is there a sound bite for this lecture? Yes. Where there's a pretzel, there's a party. And I think we'll end on that note, because once we get to that, at the end of this, you'll see exactly what I mean by it. There are some weird things that have been going on. Well, I've been collecting oral traditions. One of my doctoral requirements in Ireland was that I interview people. And they said, do Pennsylvania, it's in your backyard. So I thought, okay, food tourism, we'll go into it. Interviewing people in the countryside, I didn't do that before. I was a food historian, I was working from texts and that sort of thing. Come to find out, I really like doing field work. I like interviewing people because it's like the reality of how they live. And when you're in their home, you get a real sense of their own culinary reality, of their own social reality. And they're much more, some of them talk too much, and they tell you much more than you want to know. And you walk away from this with your head full of information that you say, this is unique, I'm going to use this someday. So when I was working on food tourism, I also was collecting recipes from these farm ladies, handed down orally. So a lot of things happened at once, and it was really all very good. We have a saying in Pennsylvania, in the Pennsylvania Dutch country. We have a row of mountains called the Blue Mountains. It's sort of that range that cuts Pennsylvania in half. The other side of the mountain is Pittsburgh. We're on this side. But anyway, there's a saying among the country people that when there's fog on the Blue Mountains, the rabbits are baking pretzels in the woods. It's a wonderful quote. And it's the first thing that I noticed in our oral history, that there's a connection between pretzels and rabbits. Well, pears, if we want to go back to Germany, Hasen. But in Pennsylvania Dutch, they call rabbits Hasen. They just use the European German word for the same thing. I'm thinking to myself, there's a lot of folklore here, and I need to know more about these pretzel baking rabbits in the woods. And where does what rabbit hole will that take me down when I'm doing my research? So that sort of launched my lecture for today. And we're going to see some hairs and eggs and all sorts of things. What I've discovered, and this is the tip of the iceberg because I've really uncovered a lot of material that I can't go into here, but the pretzel is of Celtic origin. It is older than the Germans. They came into the Rhineland, and they acculturated this earlier custom and incorporated it into German culture. Somewhere in this story, which we only have fragments of it, there is the theme of hanging, a triple hanging. Those 3 holes are for 3 corpses. So there's a human sacrifice element to this. I think I'm beginning to sort it out. But this takes us to, I've got to read it here, it's much easier. So the creation story, there are 3 towns in the Rhineland. 2 are in Baden-Württemberg and 1 is in Alsace, who claim to be the originators of the pretzel. And each one of these towns, which they don't know each other, but each town has a very similar story. So I'm thinking to myself, how did this happen? How old is this? I have research to do in Europe because I want to go to these places. I want to go into their local archives. I want to find out when these stories were first written down or who composed them, if you will. And it involves character gods, Celtic gods, Gaulish gods, let's put it that way. They're not the same Celtic gods that you have in Ireland. And by the way, I was in the School of Irish Studies. So for 3 years, I got Irish, all the signage in the whole school was in Irish. So I got my Celtic lore right up to there. Serona, which is one of the goddesses, she is a hare or rabbit. Well, for us, we call her rabbit. She's a hare in her animal form. This is very important to the story. Her name means Eastern Star. She is the star in the east that comes up with the sunrise. She determines the length of the night and the day. That astral aspect of her personality has not been explored very well. What Gaulish historians are aware of is that she was also a healing goddess. She was attached to wells and springs. I have also found more material about her and her sisterhood, let's put it that way. This was a camaraderie among women, and men were not permitted in this. There's a whole interesting story unfolding here. Then we have, where is Lugus? This is the Gaulish god that is equated with Mercury. The Romans, that Interpretatio Romana interpreted Luke as Mercury, but he really wasn't. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. And then Rosmerta, who was the female part of the story. So there are 3 gods who, in the tales about the creation of the pretzel, what happens is there's a baker who creates bread that displeases the king top god, and he's condemned to die by hanging. All the stories have hanging in them. The wife intercedes, and then somehow Sorona shows up, inspires him to create what we call the pretzel today. What happens is the king gives what did they call it? Anyway, he says to the baker, you can get off the hook if you create a bread that the sun can pass through 3 times. So there is a solar connection here to this story. And I think it may be the sky god because he was very important in that part of Rhineland. But I don't have all the actors lined up quite yet, so this is not carved in stone. But the key word here is, I'm not sure how the Gauls pronounced the word, but I think it was brace or brache with a hard C. There are different ways of pronouncing this. This is the word for triticum spelta, or spelt, dinkel in German. It's a type of wheat. I'm going to show this to you. This is key to understanding the history and origin of pretzels, but it's also related to brewing. So there is a pretzel and there is a beer story, and it goes right back to this triple sacrifice or whatever it was that occurred on the spring equinox. And the gods die for 3 days so that they can be immortal, and they come back to life on the 25th, which was the old New Year. And so there's a New Year connection to the pretzel that has stayed with it down through time. But the Christians moved it over to Easter, so it becomes an Easter pretzel, and that's one of the interesting stories we'll get into shortly. I don't want to labor on this too much because it's rather complicated and there's a lot of research I have to do. In museums that do not catalog their archaeological material very well, and territorial curators are another one of the enemies of research. But don't forget that the straw is also part of this story, because the last spelt from the last sheaf of spelt that's harvested in the fall provides the flour for the spring pretzel that's used in the fertility rites. They break it up and they scatter it in the field. This is called spirits in the wheat. There's a lot about that. In other words, their belief was all plants have souls. So in order to continue this fertility, I have to preserve the soul from last year's harvest to make sure that I'll have increase in the next. The pretzel is part of that. Okay, and there are books on what are called corn dollies, and these are figures made out of the straw from the last sheaf of wheat, and they're actually votive figures that have become, well, popular folk art today, but they had religious significance years ago. And one of them is called the Stafford knot, and that you see a picture of that on the side there. The Stafford knot is really rope, and the oral history behind it, its significance is that it was a rope for a triple hanging. So there are sort of fragments of this story scattered all over France and even in Spain and also in England. So this is one of the interesting things that I did not expect to find, that there is a lot more evidence out there than I initially thought. When I was studying in Ireland, I saw these harvest knots in the folk museums, and I thought, this is very strange, because look how similar they are to pretzels, the way that triple hole, that's there. And that is intentional. The one thing that we can't do is use the Irish knots as evidence of a Celtic custom, because they were brought over during the plantation period in England in the 1600s from England, but it's still Celtic in England. Brittonic, I guess would be the best word for it. And they're still made today. And what you see there are the harvest knots that contain heads of wheat from that last sheaf that's been harvested. So it's become, in sort of folk culture, a good luck charm, if you will. Let's leave it at that because there's a lot more that's going on here. This is a copy of a Roman image of Sirona, this goddess of the morning star, turns herself into a hare at night. She heals by incubation. All right. In other words, you go to the well and you drink this holy water, and then you fall asleep. And during your sleep period, the cure comes to you, all right, or you get a vision, and she arrives in your dreams in the form of a hare. When I found that image, I thought that's good because I really wanted to it's on a plate, by the way, terracingata, you know, the redware that was made in the Rhineland. What do I want to tell you here? Flour, pretzels, gingerbread, and pretzels are both traditionally made from spelt flour. And in Germany today, the bakeries who make real Nuremberg gingerbread, real pretzels, pay farmers to raise the spelt. That is the ancient grain involved in both of those very old traditional foods. And by the way, you see gingerbread Sirona, that is not a D. This is a Gaulish letter for a sound that does not exist in Latin or in English. It's sort of a lisp TS sound, Shalona or Sirona. And that's the way the Gauls wrote it, and that's the way you'll find it written on Gaulish monuments. We call it shape-shifting when the gods could turn themselves into animals, and all of these Gaulish gods did that. So they're animals when they want to be, they're human beings when they want to be, or they can be monsters or whatever. So this is the beauty of Celtic oral lore, because it's so rich with all of this imagery. Gets into food too. Okay, for those of you that don't know what spelt look like, I put this picture up on the screen. As you can see, the heads have no awns, the spikes. Awns, those are the hairs that you usually see on wheat or oats. They're there for a very specific reason, a botanical reason. Spelt is some kind of an ancient mutation, and it lost its ability to seed itself, which is what those hairs are for. And so it's also much more difficult to mill spelt in mills that are equipped to do common wheat. So we had spelt in Pennsylvania, but during the Civil War, the government wanted the farmers to grow wheat, and they couldn't mill it in the spelt mills. So they had to change the grindstones, and then they didn't go back to it after the Civil War. So that more or less marks the decline of spelt growing in southeastern Pennsylvania. But of course, now it's back because it's a health food, or considered that. The glooms are very hard. The glooms are what the seeds in. They're very hard, and it's difficult to get that out of there. And also, spelt flour absorbs water differently than triticum tertium, the common wheat that we eat. So there's a weight difference in the outcome of a pound of spelt flour and a pound of common wheat flour produce different weights of bread because of the way the water is absorbed. The gluten in spelt is much more highly soluble than in common wheat. Not that it's gluten-free, but it's just a different kind of gluten. Here's our goddess. This is one of the statues that has survived, depicting her with her three aspects, all right? She's wearing a tiara with a star on it, so her name means morning star, star of the east. She has a snake wrapped around her arm, which is a symbol, of course, of healing. And she has a bowl with 3 eggs. And as soon as I saw that, I said to myself, okay, why 3? Whose eggs? Those are 2 questions I haven't answered yet, but I'm close to the bottom of it. She is very well known in all the Irish in all Gaulish and Celtic publications as a healing goddess, but they have not really gone into her other aspects. She belonged, I found inscriptions which describe her sisterhood of women. And sometimes she's depicted naked to the waist. And this must have something to do with a ritual. And she's flinging her snake on a healing ritual. But I think these ladies were not female druids. They were sort of Gaulish priestess nurses, if you want to put it that way. And they had a highly organized organization, and I've been able to crack that code. I found some extraordinary things, inscriptions in, of all places, Ostia, where there was a temple built to this goddess. And there's just so much more coming out of the ground right now. I'm going to show you some interesting things. What I like is this Easter pretzel that you see up there with the red eggs, because I think basically the original one may have had 3 eggs in each one of those 3 holes. The red egg is late, that's a Christian thing. Her eggs had different colors, that I know. And I know one was green and one was yellow, but I'm not sure about the other color, but these colors must have meant something at some time. If the 3rd was purple, those are our colors for Easter and Mardi Gras and all of that, and I'm thinking, this is getting very strange. These sculptures, by the way, were painted originally. We see them as white stones in museums. They were painted to look real. And I just wish some of that trace paint would survive, because it would tell us a lot more about these individuals and how they operated. You have to realize you're not looking at a woman, you're looking at an idea that's female, that's lunar, that's fertility, that has to do with the lunar cycle, women and their monthly cycles. And this is all part of her cults. I actually think she was medicating, she and her sisterhood were taking care of female problems. And this would make sense from what other things I've been finding. How this really all comes together for the pretzel is just quite not there yet. It's like I have all the pieces on the table, but the puzzle isn't all snapped together. Yes, and this was just found last year in Denmark. I'm sorry it's not a better picture. We heard, I think we heard about Vikings and raiding and how they like gold and money because this was good for their system of giving prizes and gifts and what have you. This is loot that was found in Denmark, buried with other gold items, which come from the Palatinate or Gaul, from that part of Gaul. And this is a brooch of some kind, shaped like a pretzel, but it's got snake images. You see that it's a set of little arms, it's 2 snakes coming together. The holes at one time had gemstones in them, all right? They were pried out by the loot. The raiding party that went in and got this, and I've told the Danes, I think this came from a temple, but I can't prove it, but it would certainly look like something that one of these priestesses might have worn. That's my take on it. They don't want me to publish this because it hasn't been published yet, because they want to publish their ideas and what they think it is. But anyway, I can always make a drawing of it. and put that in my book. There is going to be a book, but I'm not quite sure when that's going to happen. Rosmerta and Lugas are the two other people that I mentioned, individuals I mentioned that are involved with this pretzel story. Rosmerta her name means great provider, and I've figured out how all of that worked together. She is usually depicted holding a loaf of bread and a bowl, a drinking cup that's sort of tipped down. These are two very important symbols of who she is. If I'm correct, Rosmerta, Lugas, and Sorona they're brothers and sisters. They're not husbands and wives or what have you. They operate together for one thing and separately for others. So what you're looking at here with Rosmerta and Lugas, or Mercury, as he's been sort of translated or Romanized in that sense, you're not looking at two people. You're looking at one idea with two halves. In other words, when Rosmerta is depicted by herself, she represents plenty and money. She has a money bag and all that. But when she's linked to her brother, Lugas, it's one idea with a male and female part to it. You can't look at this as a husband and wife team or that sort of thing. We're looking at a different mindset about what this means. And when the two are paired together, it represents brewing and it represents baking. And the word for brewing in Gaulish is derivative of the word for spelt. I think it's, I think I have it, not here, it's coming later. Anyway, spelt, as I said earlier, is Dinkel in German, and you can still get at Reform House, which is one of those health food stores, you can get Gertrude of Bingen spelt, and all that sort of thing. It's all labeled that way. And also, the story of Hansel and Gretel, is actually a fragment of one of these old Gaulish stories, and it's connected a bit to Rosmerta and Lugas. I figured out how that worked, but that's not part of it tonight. So what's going to happen when I get all this pretzel material together is that I'm going to have parts of other narratives that will all fit this thing together in a very smooth way. I'm going to be criticized, I know, because in the world of Celtic studies, nobody agrees about everything, and it may take a while to convince people, but I'm using archaeology. In other words, I'm taking oral history, I'm taking folktale, and I'm testing it against what's coming out of the ground. So I hope that when I'm done, the arguments, I'll have exhibit A, B, and C, what I need at least to support my particular ideas about that. So there's a gingerbread house lurking in the back. I just thought I'd throw in my picture because it's the oldest known one. Gingerbread house, and it's really not gingerbread. It's Lebkuchen, and this was made with honey. So it's a spelt cake, sweet, and this is, I think, what the original pretzel was, also sweet. It had to be because it's got too many loaded meanings to it. So when you go into folklore and folktale, I've been looking at myths because there are fragments of truths in them. And a lot of this sort of churned out in the 19th century in trade cards that were given to children at Easter or what have you. And even in Pennsylvania, I will talk about a book that's coming out next year that I've done. Fairies, the Pennsylvania Dutch fairy tales, fairies were born from eggs. They were not like human beings. They didn't come out of bodies. So they had no belly buttons, okay? And that's what you're looking at here. And it's interesting that the 19th century advertisers picked up on this because they were aware of all of these folk stories that were floating around, and they cashed in on it. And over here, just for the opposite side, it's not a fairy, it's a hair coming out of an egg. And here's your Rosmerta and Lubis figure reduced to a fairy tale. And these are fairies. This is not a giant egg. You're looking at miniature people in a normal sized egg being pulled by fairy hares, the kind of rabbits that made pretzels in the woods in Pennsylvania. I like this picture for several reasons. The Germans have a word, it's called Edelkitsch. It's so bad, it's good. And this is a good example of taking this Easter theme and giving it lots of layers of popular culture. The most important thing here is that the hair is there, the eggs are there, but it's that pretzel. This is an Easter bread, and it's connected with this feast that took place during the spring, some sort of spring planting rites, okay? And just to make sure, these were done in Germany but sold in the US, but just to make sure we have enough pretzels on site, this hare has a wagon full. That's what's in the back seat of that little wagon. It's more pretzels. But these large pretzels are the type of pretzel that would have been used in pre-Christian times, because they could be used as like a flag or a device leading a procession, to a well or to wherever these rites took place. And that tradition still exists well, it did in the 19th century, but I'll show you how when the pretzel comes out of the woodwork, something starts to happen, people start to get together, and it starts to form commensality. This picture I chose, because I have to keep moving here, I chose this because it had pretzels in it, and I didn't realize that it's a hand grenade in terms of what does this mean. I think we heard, was it yesterday? Yes, about Canterbury and the monks and how they signed language to each other. That's what's going on in this painting. You see these men? This is supposed to be Jesus and his disciples at a Last Supper. But what's really here, this is propagandistic from a church standpoint, but what's really happening is you've got the disciples and Jesus is the one in the green cloak, okay? They're using monks' sign language. That's why the hands are in all these very strange positions. If anybody can translate that, I'd love to know what it says. However, they are separate from this table, which is sort of floating in front of them. And what is depicted on the table is the feast of monks. As it's not a feast, it's the opposite. It's a fasting meal. And I'm looking at these three pretzels and I'm thinking, why three? Does this mean something that I've missed? Well, I think that this kind of pretzel that we're looking at is later than the pagan pretzels, that they were more bread-like and large. These, I think, are a Christianized adaptation. But I'm not quite sure. I wonder why there are three. Does this mean something? That maybe there is a hidden message in this painting that I've missed. But I'm going to come back to this in a minute. What I want you to, what I think is the most important thing here, is in the lives of the abbots of St. Tron in Belgium. We know the dates of this tract that's written in Latin, but it uses a lot of Gaulish words. It mentions pretzels using the Gallo-Roman word, braciolo, or braciolo, or brachiolo, whatever, diminutive, singular. Again, that word is derivative from the word for spelt, okay? B-R-A-C in the beginning. And I'm not sure, we've been translating this word as little arms, but I'm not sure that's the original root meaning. I'm going to work on that. But anyway, what this says is that pretzels were eaten by the monks on Easter and Pentecost during special meals in which portions of kippered fish and cheesecake were allowed. Sounds to me, and each monk received a pretzel. Now, they don't define what they mean by pretzel in this tract. This is the oldest documented reference to pretzels, all right? This we know. So I'm thinking that since these guys are eating something special, we heard about the monks getting special foods, that this pretzel that they got was probably not those crispy dried ones that those monks were, those people were eating in the last scene, but rather something soft and sweet with honey in it. But it was definitely made from spelt, because that's the root meaning of that word. I have to analyze this. I now want to go to this monastery. It's still there, and just sort of take in the karma, see how what I might find there, because you never know what kind of carving there may be, things that most people would miss. Here we are back to this scene. I just want to reaffirm for you that this is a Lenten scene. The pretzels in this context means sacrifice. In other words, you're giving up something as opposed to receiving something special. And that idea of sacrifice is buried in the whole meaning of the pretzel creation story. So there are several kinds of bread here. One is the trencher. You see these things that look like plates? Those are round loaves of bread that have been sliced. And they're using the slice of bread as a plate. This was common in the Middle Ages. That's how it was done. Those dirty trenchers were changed with every changes of courses in the meals. And then they were either fed to the honey hounds or put in baskets and distributed to the poor outside the palace or outside the monastery. So that's the bread the poor got. In my book about medieval Cyprus, which is done, looking for a publisher, I mentioned that I stayed in a monastery, Makaras, which is one of the oldest in Cyprus. And the abbot let me stay there for 3 days. I wanted to know about their holy soup. I wanted to know about what they had in their typikon, which is their book of rules about food, and were they really remaining true to this original book written down, I think around 1112, 1110, somewhere in there. And Brother Hope, that's what his name meant in Greek, takes me into the library, this medieval room full of manuscripts and what have you. He pulls out the Typicon. I mean, this is a national treasure. He puts it on the Xerox machine and copies it for me. And I'm thinking, don't do that. But anyway, it happened. And what did they say? They said, you can use this as long as you need it, but when you're finished, burn it, because this is a thing of God. And I said, oh, well, that would be sacrilegious to burn it. Oh no, the Turks might get it. I stayed out of that one. There's your trencher. Then you've got your pretzels. We've got kippered herring. We heard about that just a minute ago. And in that plate in the middle are herring roe. Okay, that's what those strange things look like. The artist really wanted us to know that because he put one on the tablecloth. And then you've got the manchet rolls, which I think is out of place for Lenten fasting, because this is the king's bread. This is the best white wheat bread you can eat. And in Cyprus, those round dinner rolls were only served at the royal court. Nobody else got them. They were called the king's bread. So we've got the pretzel, we've got that. Oh, and then this was called an exagio, the amount of wine you were allowed to drink at a meal when you were fasting or in a monastery. And in Cyprus, it was called an exagio, even by the Latin monks. And it was 90 milliliters, or 3 ounces of liquid. It was mixed with water as well. And I asked the monks, I said, oh, and you're not even using olive oil. Oh no, when we fast, we cannot use olive oil. Why? Well, it's concentrated, thousands and thousands of olives. So it's, it's a luxury. But they could eat olives just the same. I mean, go figure. I was not trying to second guess their book of rules, but they made up these dietary rules based on religious ideas. The abbot was very interesting. I mentioned some of his comments about that. And the idea of white wine being the vinegar or the cheap wine that was washed the wounds of Christ on the cross, and how this was, you didn't drink red wine when you were fasting, but there's red wine here, but it's mixed with water. And I have a medieval glass exactly like that, and it holds precisely 3 ounces of liquid. And there are a couple that survive in medieval Cyprus. They're in the Cyprus Museum right now, in the Medieval Museum. And I've looked at them, and they also are very specific about the quantity of liquid that they hold. Moving on, this is an older picture, more Byzantine in style, and Jesus is giving communion to this man who is down on his, I guess, his knees. And this has been misinterpreted because in some books, the authors have said that he is serving this man pretzel. You see there's a pretzel image over there on the table. That's unconsecrated. Pretzels are never consecrated, so they can't be used for communion. It's not the host. I have a feeling that this bread is coming from what this man is receiving is the bread on the other side of that. See, in the middle of the table, there are slices of bread that he's using for the communion, mainly because there is a special knife. You see that presentoir that's on the table? This is a knife without a point. It's used in medieval service to cut the bread and serve it to people. That's both for the cutting of the manchet breads and also for the cutting of the breads that are used for plates. And there was a person who was in charge of doing that, usually a noble, because non-nobles were not allowed to touch the food that was served at the high table. But there's this special knife is on the table, which tells me that this other image, it's there for a reason, and I'm not quite sure what the message is. However, this is when it gets interesting. I just happened, luckily, this is why I need to go to the museums and spend time in there looking at mislabeled artifacts. This is a piece of a palace or a church from Trier, and there is this image at the top. You can see it looks like a pretzel. It's intact, it's not broken. I don't know what this is. I don't know whether this is just a flourish, but you have to remember, even in the Greek churches and in Cyprus, the stonecutters put things on the walls, dragons and all sorts of monsters and what have you, that were sort of outside the religious narrative of the building. And so I don't know what this is, but anyway, I found it and I'm going to hang on to this because I think it might be this type of a pretzel, which has another story to it altogether. Moving on here, I don't know if my time is running out, I hope not. There are other kinds of pretzels which echo that story of the hangman's noose, and this is a special one from North Germany, and it's made from a rye flour. So not all pretzels were made from spelt. They probably reflected the grain of what you grew there in that particular place. And that would be the most sacred grain for your particular fertility rite. You thought there were pretzels were from Germany. Well, here they are on top of a church in Spain. The interesting thing about this cross is that it's on top of a church that was, we know the date of the church, 1102. This is older than the church. It comes from a monument that pre-existed this church a long, long time ago. And it ended up on top because it makes, for Christians, it makes a cross. But what it really represents is the solar calendar. Midwinter, spring solstice, midsummer, fall solstice. And so you've got the 4 seasons here. So this is really representing the motion of time. And it is a Celtic image, which is a very interesting thing. It looks a bit like the Bridget's crosses that we find in England and Ireland, but that's another story. The Brewcastle cross in Cumbria has this very same image. I have to go there and photograph this because none of the photographs online are very good, but I understand what that means. It has something to do with the passage of time and the calendar. You were not allowed, the Roman Church passed a ban on breads that depicted the solar wheel because this was pagan. So the people who were preserving the old religion found alternate ways to express it. Let's just put it at that. And these are an old type of pretzel that you can find them only in Bergen, in Norway, Bergen Kringle, and they were made with wheat flour, so they're very different from the pretzels of the Rhineland. They're very dry and crisp, and they're often served at funerals in Norway. And the pretzel is actually put on graves, and even today in like Austria and Switzerland, and it plays a role in rites of passage, and we'll get to that in a minute. I bought these in Bergen, Norway in 1987. They've lasted that long because I just photographed them last week. It was called what the Germans would call Dauerbrot. It's meant to last a long time. And it's dry like a cracker, all right? You just break it up and put it in beer or what have you. Here is where we get into the New Year's pretzel and this whole calendrical thing that it's tied into, the new year. When the new year was the 25th of March, it made more sense how that would fit into Easter fertility and spring rites. But then we moved the calendar back to January 1, and so they just moved all of these customs back onto the calendar. The thing about folk culture is it never sloughs off old customs. It just keeps adding all of these things to it. It's sort of like a conglomerate, a stone with things in it. But anyway, Happy New Year's or Good New Year's. This is a Swedish card, and there you've got the pretzel. They acquired this through contacts with Germany. There is a New Year's pretzel from Pennsylvania. That recipe is in my book, Dutch Treats. Yes, we had to make one, but you better have a large stove because it's this big. And then the pretzel, commensality, where there's a pretzel, there's a party. This is a postcard for the Munich Oktoberfest. And you see where there's beer and pretzels, this goes back to this old connection between Rose Mountain and Lucas, which is, I find, quite amazing that this custom has survived so long. But often the case with folk culture is that when one group acquires something and from another, sometimes it becomes like a bug in amber, and they keep it longer than the group they got it from. And this is the case in Pennsylvania with the Schwenkfelders. They acculturated from the Anglo-Americans of the early 18th century wedding bread that's flavored with saffron. And now the Schwenkfelders are the only people in Pennsylvania who make wedding breads with saffron in it. But they did not bring that with them on the boat when they came to the US. Pretzel is German identity, product of 19th century stereotyping. That's the pretzel you guys know about, because this is the one we read about in print media and what have you. I love this little German guy. He's from East Saginaw. That's here in Michigan, isn't it? It's a trade card from right here. Of course, a stereotypical German. That's another card from the food tourism promoting the Oktoberfest and all the symbols involved in it. But it's beer and pretzels, and that goes way back. Pretzel as street food. Here's your commensality, improvised. boys buy pretzels from a vendor on the street, and then they have a little pretzel party right there leaning against the wall. So this is what makes the pretzel so interesting, is that it's so adaptable. It can create all kinds of situations where people can come together and share ideas and food, and it doesn't have to be expensive. Another picture of a pretzel vendor. This is an Austrian. I've been collecting these because they're really quite good. This guy can put his stake in the ground and toot his horn, and then people can show up and start eating pretzels and enjoy a little snack on the go. This picture is priceless. I'm so glad I found it at a flea market in Pennsylvania. It's pretzels and ice cream. This is a real Pennsylvania Dutch thing. People actually like to take those stick pretzels, you know, with the salt on them, and they put them in their bowl of ice cream so it looks like a porcupine, and then they eat it that way. That's what's happening here. This is about 1905, 1910. It's an ice cream picnic, and they're serving pretzels. And I think the reason behind this picture is that little boy. See him over there sitting on mom's lap? He's eating a pretzel. That's because the custom was when you turned 1 year old, your godparents gave you a pretzel. With all the childhood diseases out there, if you made it to year 1, that's a celebration. And that's what the reason I think is behind this whole picnic idea. This baby is now 1 year old. We're having our picnic in the park, pretzels and ice cream. And the whole family is there to celebrate it. So this is what I mean, where there's a pretzel, there's a party, things start to happen. Pretzel and food tourism, I could do a whole lecture on this. Anyway, this Amish thing, back in Pennsylvania, we just roll our eyes and walk away from it. But this is part of the food tourism thing, that Pennsylvania Dutch means Amish, and then they've been using these Amish images to promote pretzels, to sell them to tourists and people from out of state. First of all, the Amish did not bring pretzels with them when they came over on the boat. It was basically the Swabians who were the bakers in southeastern Pennsylvania, and I'll go into that as American issue for my pie. Secondly, the pretzels were made by bakers, by bread bakers. They were a townie thing. You had to go into Lancaster or into Reading or one of the small towns to find a bread baker who made pretzels. It's not something you made at home. What's happened in southeastern Pennsylvania is that the Amish have run out of farmland. So now they're doing all kinds of other things. Amish birdhouses, Amish, lawn furniture. Amish made this, Amish made that, because they have to make a living. And so they are very wise about what they can sell to outsiders. So some of the Amish now make pretzels because the myth, it's like the reality is now catching up with the mythology. It's sort of flipping this whole thing. And there is near New Holland, for example, there is Groff's. They make pretzels by hand. And this whole idea, we kept hearing the word about authenticity. And what is authenticity? And how do we manufacture authenticity? Is it, and I'm asking questions here because I'm not going to give answers tonight, but food of the golden moment, you can really take this to another level. A symbol without meaning, that's a book I'd like to write. And these are Amish made, farm fresh, hand twisted by Amish women singing hymns. Now, how authentic can that get? And they do sing hymns in there while they're twisting the pretzels. And it's very strange if you're not accustomed to that kind of thing. Actually, the pretzel city in Pennsylvania was Reading, and there must have been 20 pretzel companies up there. This is where all the real pretzel baking was done in our state. And this is a pretzel brochure, a tourist brochure from 1916, telling you where you can go to get all the best Pennsylvania wines. There were vineyards back then before Prohibition. Where to eat, what hotels serve what, and also where to get the best pretzels. So this is really a food brochure. It is shaped like a pretzel when you open it up. This is called die cut in the food ephemera world. And it's a brilliant piece of advertising because you take this away and you remember. If there's nothing to remember about Reading, you'll remember pretzels, and that's the message here. Pretzel folklore. Well, during Prohibition, the pretzel was associated with drunkenness and taverns, and all illicit things that go on in them. And so the National Pretzel Bakers Institute, right? They're long since extinct. Came up with this idea that the pretzel was invented by a monk and crossed hands so it's a blessing. You see, they Christianized the whole thing to clean it up so it would be okay to the prohibitionists. There is no way you can fact check what they published. The European scholars I know who have heard about this, they call it interpretatio Americana, and they say that derisively, where we've taken a traditional thing and given it our own spin, if you will. The idea being that it means bracelet in Latin, but this is the wrong word because the Latin bracelos in Gaulish is viriola. I mean, two different words. So all the etymologies that they used here are wrong. And there is another problem that I've run into online where we have the, just because they're round and crisp, they're pretzels, but they're not. They're not even related to the origin of this. This is an Eastern Mediterranean. It probably has a solar background, but I'm not going to go into that here. Isidore of Seville mentions the calori in his treatise on food, and well, it's actually kind of an encyclopedia. And he is, I think, the source that the Bakers Association felt was the original reference to the pretzel, and it's not. A, Isidore of Seville was not a monk, never was a monk. And B, he was, we know now, after having his texts have been analyzed, he's citing an extract from a Greek treatise. And I have found recipes for what he was talking about in medieval Arab texts where they've taken the Greek and they turned it into Arabic, and they call it Rumi, which is the Arabic word for Romans, but they meant Byzantine Greeks. The Polish obarzanek, those twisted rolls, come out of Byzantium. These are not pretzels. They've been called Polish pretzels, or the origin of the bagel. That's another parallel story. It has nothing to do with the real pretzel, but I know that colore politici it means colore Constantinople style. And this is the bread that Isidore of Seville was talking about. So I just want to make that clear. Sometimes when you're doing this kind of complicated research, it's a matter of process of elimination. You know what it isn't, and you just keep moving this stuff over until you end up with some good evidence. Okay, my book, As American as Shoofly Pie, it went to one publisher and they said, this is unpublishable. This is a bunch of crap. And, well, I knew better. We took it to the University of Pennsylvania and they loved it. And it's been one of their best sellers. It's now out in paperback. And it's doing what I wanted it to do. This is one of the books I was supposed to write, coming out of my PhD research. If I may just tell a short story about this. I wanted to have symbols of food tourism on the cover of this book. And I wanted, I don't know whether you all know about Pennsylvania Dutch hex signs, but these are these round things that go on the sides of barns. And I won't go into the history of that because it's been published and well documented. But I wanted one that looked patriotic. And that meant something red, white, and blue. Because as American as Shoofly Pie, I wanted to carry that theme. By the way, that's Shoofly Pie in the picture with the flag stuck in it. And I called the museum. I said, that collects Pennsylvania Dutch. I said, do you have any hex signs that are red, white, and blue? And she said, well, we've got a couple, but they're so awful, they're so bad, we keep them in storage. We wouldn't dare put these out on display. Can I come and see them? And they showed me that. That's it. I want that for the cover of my book. And they were appalled. But anyway, that's how that happened. I just borrowed it from them. But in any case, I have a book coming out next year. It's Pennsylvania Dutch Fairy Tales, Stories of Witchcraft, Magic, and the Supernatural. This should have been published 50 years ago. I picked up the work of Dr. Don Yoder, who was a cousin of mine, father of American folklore. You can look him up on Library of Congress website, because he helped found the Folk Life Center down there. But anyway, this is coming out in a limited edition, illustrated, and the artist is working on the pictures right now, which is why the book is sort of in slow motion. This has got a lot in it about pretzels and the spirit in the wheat and that kind of thing, because these are oral stories that were collected in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And then I picked up some while I was interviewing people about food. So we've got 40 there. And the only reason that book happened is I broke my leg. I was in bed for 6 months. So I said, okay, I'm going to glue this quilt together and we're going to make a book out of it. Maybe I can pay my doctor bills. Anyway, so the New Year's pretzel, a symbol of harvest, a completion of the spirit in the wheat by taking this natural cycle of nature, putting it back into the ground. It's an icon of midwinter feasting, baking with flour from the last sheaf of wheat, crumbs scattered in the fields during spring planting, and some of those themes show up in those fairy tales. All of those recipes that you see in that picture are in my book, Touch Treats. So you can bake yourself all the way to Christmas if you want, because there's something in there for everybody. These are New Year's pretzels from Alsace. These are sweet. Again, here is this, the pretzel as an idea, that it's demarcating the line between the old and the new. These are all sweet. What else do I want to say? And they've been boiled in lye. That is a later thing which you may want to ask me about at some point. These are the Swabian Laugenbäckchen. We can get them in Pennsylvania at almost any store. So they're still very popular, but they're not pretzels. They're just dinner rolls that have been boiled in lye and treated like pretzels. But they're very habit forming, let me tell you. Lots of carbs in these babies. I wanted to serve some here, but it was just too much of logistics problems because they have a wonderful taste if they're done right. These are medieval. I have proof of that. New Year's pretzel brings good luck. This is the other thing about Sirona and her hair. You know, the rabbit's foot brings you good luck. She's part of this whole idea of controlling events so that there will be a good outcome. And the New Year's pretzel is part of that. And what you see are children pulling on it, breaking the New Year's pretzel for good luck. It's like the wishbone thing, you know, at Thanksgiving, you pull it apart. The guys with the biggest piece are the ones who are going to have the best things happen to them in the coming year. So that's what you see here. This is, I believe, a Norwegian New Year's card. I must be, because they look like Norwegian elves. You know, there's a saying in Ireland, when the leprechauns get tired of Ireland, they'll go back to Norway. That's what I think we're looking at here. Here's another one, 1680s, mold, gingerbread. These men are breaking the gingerbread for good luck. They're the gingerbread stars. The striezel, which is that braided bread in the middle, that is a symbol of the head of wheat. That's what that symbolizes. So it's really a fertility symbol. And then what we call in Pennsylvania Dutch, the kimmikweek, the kissing buns, the round dinner rolls that are baked together in a big pan. And where they stick together, that's called the kiss. And they're only served at funerals and weddings. So they were a very special occasion. And you see that, that's what's going on. And then there's the broken pretzel, which takes us in the opposite direction. It's the end of the meal. It has a sexual metaphor. There's a whole genre, there's a whole group of books written about the still life painting as pornography. a lot of this is not written in English. Probably thank God for teenagers, but the Italians and the Dutch and the French have been and the Spanish have been writing a lot about this because still life paintings were private. You didn't hang them in public places, you hung them in private chambers. So they had illicit meanings that you could display in your private rooms that you couldn't in a public place. Let's put it at that. This is definitely pornography, but I'm not going to analyze it and tell you why. Klaus-Dieter Roth, Reste der Tafelwunde, is an interesting book to read if you want to get into German philosophy about and analyzing the social meaning of the curious or perhaps unintended messages of an abandoned dinner table. You see, he's starting with the mess, the people are gone, and he's now going to analyze what this all means about us as human beings and the way we shared food or didn't. It's a very interesting book. I recommend it. You don't have to agree with it, but anyway. Okay, you asked for it. The Spritzpetzle. The Biberach New Year's pretzel is a fertility, but it was probably a votive originally. By that I mean, you made wax or bread figures of the part of the body that needed help. You know, there was something wrong with you, so you threw this into the well so the gods could take care of that piece of you that was sick. You'll find eyeballs, you'll find lungs, you'll find a hand or a foot, or in this case, a pretzel, you know what. This has evolved in Germany into it's now a gay pretzel, right? But you can see why. But the pretzel's undergoing more meanings of change because, you know, Samhain, Halloween's a big thing now. And that is a Celtic end of harvest, beginning of the dark half of the year, heavy celebration. It's been co-opted by the neo-pagans and the Wicca people. And as you can see, this is the Philly pretzel factory. They're a chain. They're just not only in Pennsylvania, they're all over the place. I think they did a good job of this skeleton, but it's taking the pretzel in a whole other direction. We in the Pennsylvania Dutch culture celebrated Harvest Home on that day first, and all the harvest, all the things from the gardens and fields were brought into the church and blessed. And that's when a big pretzel was also blessed. And that pretzel was saved for the spring. So there were ministers who didn't mind bringing these symbols into the church that he knew was probably not Christian, but it wasn't conflicting openly with anything that he was preaching about. So they allowed it. Some ministers in Pennsylvania were very much against that kind of thing. So it was sort of, you can't make it generalities, but Dr. Don Yoder traced a lot of that. Okay, pretzel is rite of passage. Carl Ritter becomes a baker. I know that because his name and the date is right there on his trophy pretzel. He has just graduated from, I guess, apprenticeship to become a baker. And there's a little boy with a pretzel. First year is 1 year old. And I find a lot of these in southeastern Pennsylvania. So this custom was very, very common of giving this first year child a pretzel. I hope by then they had teeth. And also this is done in Alsace, and this is a painting, a rather well-known one. I think it's in Strasbourg in the Folk Museum, the Art Museum. But this is also promoting a lot of Alsatian French cultural icons, Gugelhupf, the Dachshund, but the little boy's getting his birthday pretzel. And it's his godmother who's bringing it, and that's his godmother's daughter. So there's a whole custom involved here. We don't do this in America, but in Germany, the godparents would give their godchildren one of these pretzels for their first day of school, and that's what you're looking at here. This little girl, she says, "Mein erster Schulgang," 1926, my first day of school. And this was a very proud day for the children. And this picture means that there was also some kind of a party. You know, they go to school, they get their tofu pretzel, and they come home and they have a special little meal. It's like a birthday. It's a very, very important turning point in their lives. I was looking for these large pretzels in Pennsylvania. I found it in this volunteer refreshment saloon, 1864, Great Sanitary Fair, inside of that building, where they did the Pennsylvania kitchen, everything traditional. There you see it right on the top of the mantle in the middle. It's one of these great big giant pretzels. We have references to these pretzels being carried in parades and that. I have not found a lot of photography recording these customs. So this is quite rare. Of course, the lady in the Martha Washington outfit, and of course, your spinning wheels. You have to have spinning wheels if you're doing something colonial. So that was in there as part of the entertainment for the soldiers. The industrialization of the pretzel, which is a whole nother story. It's where you take a food that had spirituality and a lot of personal meaning for people, and it becomes an industrialized object. It loses, it's like corn, has been despiritualized, if you will. The industrialization of the food has changed the way it's made, but some of the customs, interestingly enough, that were attached to them did continue. There's a book on pretzel baking. That's the red book that you see there. And he has like 300 different recipes for pretzels, every known kind of pretzel that you could make in Germany at that particular time in history. It's a rare book, but it also promotes the industrialization of the pretzel. When the pretzel's industrialized and becomes this cheap object that you can get at any market, it seeds pretzel nostalgia. So you start seeing objects that glorify the pretzel as table toys. 1902, beer stein, shaped like a pretzel, made to look like it's made out of pretzel dough. And one of the most popular Prohibition pretzels in Philadelphia were the flasks, shaped like pretzels. There's a cork that's supposed to go in that little piece that sticks up. You put that in your pocket or your purse, and you've got your rye whiskey, even though it's not legal. May it do you well, that's what it says here. Same grain, same yeast, beer. Think of beer as liquid bread. That'll take you but closer to the meaning of beer as the Gauls knew it, okay? And that's sort of what's going on here, because this is the beer stein that belonged to a baker. In praise of the baker's finest handiwork. That's what that says on the roof, on the lid of it. I'm starting to think in Dutch. Pretzels were used as Guildhall emblems, so you're going to find them on buildings, sort of taken out of their food context, but they're there to send a message. And this is a stained glass window that belongs to a baker's guild. So in other words, when people go to church every Sunday, they see this pretzel image. I mean, it's like you've got this image coming at you from all angles. Of course, the pretzel spreads west. We have the earliest pretzel baker in Philadelphia was 1683. He was from Holland. We only know about him because he got in a lot of trouble with the law. So I mean, he was in and out of jail. I don't know what he was doing, but in any case, pretzel baking was very early in the Delaware Valley. It comes west. The railroad helped do that. This is just one of the pieces of pretzel ephemera that I've managed to collect. Fractal pretzels, this recipe is in my book. These are made with cookie cutters. They're deep fried. They're actually donuts shaped like pretzels. And these are called Berliner in Germany. And they're made in Berlin. You know, when Kennedy gave his famous speech at the Berlin Wall, he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." He got it wrong because he said, "I'm a deep fried pretzel." And that's why the Germans laughed. So this is what he ended up talking about when he didn't mean it. This is a little sign, chocolate pretzels. This is where the pretzel has moved from Dauerbrot and festive to a dessert food where you start putting sugar on it. and turning it into something that you eat with tea and coffee. And that's what this chocolate pretzel sign, this was a sign that went into a store, in front of a tray to tell you what they cost. Chocolate pretzels, both solid and coated, weren't really created until the 1890s, because that's when we learned how to emulsify chocolate. So it stuck together as a candy. I've been collecting all of this stuff because I figured it's going to make great illustrations sometime in the book. So I'm going to finish up here because I know I've gone over a bit. Party time. Where there's a pretzel, there's always a party. And what I found interesting about this birthday card is it's going right back to this custom of these little kids getting their first birthday pretzel. Sam will wish, but it's taking that theme of the pretzel of this something new is happening in your life. It's a rite of passage. And it ends, of course, with happy birthday, everything that goes with it. And this is a little beer stein that's on a spring and it bounces. So this connection that we found on a Gaulish monument between beer and pretzels is still with us today. And I'm going to end there and thank you. And if you're going to have a pretzel party, you have to dress for the part, right? Thank you. Yeah, I hope I didn't wear you out.
Oh, no, not at all.
So time for a few questions, yeah?
Okay. I hope you're all hungry now for pretzels.
We'll open up the floor for questions.
Hi, this was absolutely fascinating. So I do a little bit of folklore study, and so you're talking about Sirona, and one word I didn't hear you say was coven. Coven,
Coven?
yeah. Well, so because you're talking about witchcraft, you're talking about
Right. Well,
nature and healing and these women getting together in a group, but I wonder what you think about them being coven.
I'll tell you why I avoided that. I'm not going to be the person to call her a water witch, although I'm sure there are people who would. However, you're not far from the target because the word Senna is used in Gaulish on one of the monuments to describe her nymphs. Senna is a word for witch. So they weren't female druids, but they were definitely, I call them a sorority of women who practiced healing arts. We call that in Pennsylvania Dutch braucherij, as opposed to hekserij. In other words, it's white magic, it's positive, it counteracts evil and black magic. So I don't want to call her a witch because in the way I grew up, witches were the negative and Sirona is a positive, all right? I don't want to put a veneer of 21st century value judgments on the way they lived. I really do believe that they practiced sacrifice of probably humans. So they may have been very tough ladies. But yes, that's why I don't want to use the witch. I think that's judgmental in a way, because I think they were much more complicated than that. It was very definitely, and I can prove this, and I will have the documentation. It was very definitely a feminist organization. Men were not permitted in it. So this is the kind of organization that the Christian church would like to call witchcraft, because then they could, suppress it. But anyway, I'm kind of going around the barn, but thank you for the question. It's the terminologies that are being used for a lot of these Gaulish monuments, they call them husband and wife, or partners, and we're looking. This is a modern day person or a 19th century Germanist or Francophile. imposing sexual relationships on images that don't read the way we read culture. Okay, it's complicated. Anyway, sorry, going all the way around the world and back.
Thank you very much, Professor Leroy, for a very fascinating talk. But I'm still not certain about the origin of the pretzel, because you mentioned several dates. The first oldest reference occurred in the 11th century. Some of you argue that it's 610. Even you show the pre-Christian image of pretzel. So yeah, indeed. Did you find any archaeological evidence of earlier pretzels? Or can you provide the right dates for the invention?
Well,
Thank you.
I use the Trond quote because that is watertight about what's being referred to there. To date, there are no references to the pretzel that I could, without a shadow of doubt, say that is a good reference. There are indeed other references that I have to go over there and do the work because I have to undo some bad scholarship. I'm sorry to put it that way, but there's just a lot of sloppy scholarship sometimes. And yes, there are some monuments with pretzels on them, but we have to be able to date them first before we start throwing dates around. One of the towns that claims to be the origin place for the history of the pretzel is in Alsace, and they're documented back to at least 725 AD, and they were around before that, so it must have been a Celtic settlement. These are questions I can't answer here tonight because I need a couple months over there and just to sort this out. But I'm very much aware of what you're saying, and yes, it's going to take some more research. That's why this is just a work in progress. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thanks, yeah, fascinating. And I wanted to know about the American usage of the pretzel. Because you had such great information about the spiritual religious origins. And then you mentioned the 19th century, I guess, is when the secularization of the pretzel starts, But
well, no, it was secularized long before that.
That's my question.
Yeah.
Did the Americans in the colonial period use these in the more religious, Easter style things you're talking about?
Not the Anglo-Americans. The question was about using pretzels in these religious contexts, in churches and what. That was very much part of Pennsylvania Dutch culture. And in fact, the first treatise on the Easter egg was written by a professor at Heidelberg in 1682. Believe it, that late. And he's talking about hares bringing eggs. He thought they were laying them. We're talking about an egg bringer. The animal doesn't have to lay it to bring it. And one of the earliest depictions of a hare carrying a basket of eggs is from Pennsylvania, not from Germany. And it's down in the Abbey Aldrich Rockefeller collection in colonial Williamsburg. I'm going to show that it's 18th century. There's nothing like that in Germany or in Alsace. But it was the Pennsylvania Dutch culture, which is not necessarily Amish because it's a mixture of Lutheran, German Reformed, people from Switzerland, Alsace, all of them came together and coalesced very quickly. Those are the people that continued these customs, the birthday pretzels. The pretzels brought into the church for fertility reasons. And the pretzel was so common in southeastern Pennsylvania that it was acculturated by everybody else around it. So it's like pork and sauerkraut for New Year's, which is another one of our regional customs. Well, the African Americans do it, the Jewish people do it. I mean, Poles are doing it. You go into the Acme and they've got the sauerkraut and pretzels and all the 9 yards because it's a local food. It's like scrapple. It's another one. So it was acculturated that the pretzel has undergone secularization. I think I don't know if it has out this way, whether people eat pretzels and they think of some of these, some of the symbolism that I've talked about, but it's definitely still alive in southeastern Pennsylvania and even among the Mennonites and Amish. You know, well, you first of all have to find one that's willing to talk about their beliefs because that's outside of church, and then I got in trouble with the bishop. But yeah, the Dutch in the Hudson Valley also had pretzels because the pretzel. I didn't tell you this, but the pretzel in the Middle Ages became the symbol of the baker. So if you hung a pretzel outside of your shop, that meant you were baking bread and it was ready for sale. That was sort of, it was just it. It was a metaphor for bread. Exactly when that happened, I don't know. And that's another thing I want to look into. I know when certain guilds were, when they were founded, and we have those dates. But see, I have a lot of work to do yet. I don't care. I love doing it.
I'm going to volunteer Grace and a bit of Harry Potter trivia for us. If you don't mind.
And I just noticed that the bartender in Harry Potter is Rosmerta, right? So I was just thinking that particular connection. I actually did have a question, which was, thank you very much for the talk. My question was about the hanging nooses. I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about how the pretzel was connected to the hanging noose, which startled me. I wasn't sure.
I know. I didn't really expect that, but all of the pretzel stories have a theme of hanging as punishment in them. Okay. So there's something to this. And what's very interesting is that if we have our genealogies right, our Gaulish genealogies, then Rosmerta and Ubis and Sirona are all children of Isis. And he is the god of hanging them. He is a willow tree. And the Romans just really thought of him as one of the evil gods of the Gauls, because when they came into Gaul, they found these willow trees draped with heads. Collecting heads was very important to the Gauls because that's where the soul and the spirit inhabited the body. So there is a hanging theme, but I can't bring it together quite yet. And there's some other oral tales about this hanging thing. And I can only suspect that some kind of ritual took place during that 3-day period before the New Year's. And whether it was the gods themselves that were hung or whether they were sort of stand-in criminals who were dispatched to pay this debt, that could be part of it. Something like that happened, but I don't have it all sorted out. You know, the Pope, it was about 750 AD, he sent a papal bull to the Bishop of Mainz, and he said, I forbid Christians in your Rhineland to be selling their servants or their slaves to the pagans for sacrifice. So it's still going on surreptitiously back in the woods or whatever, and that wouldn't have happened if there wasn't a problem. So what do you think that the church was very successful at stamping out some of this, but it took a long time, and a lot of it went underground. That's why we have Dragarai in Pennsylvania, and Hexarai, and all that's alive and well, by the way, back in the hills. There are people who really believe this, and Patrick Donnemeyer at the Pennsylvania German Cultural Heritage Center has written books about it, so I'm not going to tread on his territory because it's extremely good. But he's talked to these people. My grandfather was a Baruch. That's why he had a seed collection. He was a green man. So I sort of grew up with that. It was a good green man. Isn't a question?
I have a question. You mentioned early in your talk about 3 areas, 2 in Germany and 1 in Alsace, that you really wanted to get back to, and
Yes.
particularly said, could you tell us those areas?
What are they all?
What towns? Yeah, which towns are?
You know, it's in my briefcase in the back of the room. Ingweiler in Alsace. I think it's Altenbach in Altenried in Baden. Sambach. No, Bad. It's also bad. I'm sorry, I'm kind of brain weary, but I have those names in my briefcase. I wrote them down just in case somebody asked. Of course, I didn't bring it up. But those 3 towns are very far apart from one another, but they all have extremely similar stories about how this creation happened. The oldest of the 3 is the one in Alsace. But the other 2 have springs. And that's a very important point because if Saroni is involved in this in some way, there's got to be a sacred spring involved in this. And that it's not Altenried, but the other town, they do a pretzel, big giant pretzels, and they have a procession on Palm Sunday. I want to go and see this because I think it's very important that I do. So this is all the kind of food research that COVID has sort of killed right now for me. And I can tell you later when I get to my briefcase if you want the names. Just and also my business cards there if you want to get my
How about your wallet?
email. Yeah. It won't get far on that one. Yeah. Well, I got around that in England. I found some rare recipes in Cumbria that they didn't know about, so I sent them heirloom recipes in return for archival research. And they loved it. That's how you get around COVID.
I just have a quick question about how the pretzel is in the 21st century. As being a child of the 21st century, I saw the pretzel like if I went to like the supermarket, like at like the like when you were leaving, or like at sporting events,
Yeah.
or at carnivals. Like I felt like it infiltrated a lot of my life, and how it had no connection with anything religious or any traditions. I just wanted to ask what your theories are, your opinions about how the pretzel went from this very traditional idea to now it's, I just saw pretzel as something.
Yeah, well, that's a bit what I wanted to. Well, the industrialization of the pretzel, turned it into the same kind, like potato chips and other snack foods. It lost its authenticity, if you want that overused word. It lost its meaning as food. It's just become a cheap snack. And industrialization did that to it. Maybe when I get my book written and you read it, I'll convert you to a spiritual pretzelologist.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Weaver.
Okay, thank you.
I'll say briefly in closing, behind the scenes, the people who made this whole conference work, and I want to thank one more time before we leave is Peter and Nathan, of course, who conceded the conference, and we're all here because of them, so thank you very much. In-person conference for my first since COVID had hit this age that reminds us how important it is to build these intellectual bridges. So we've all been studying sociability. Now you're required to be sociable, and that's an order, I think, for a long time. So the reservations are at the Southern Guard restaurant, and Peter and Nathan indicated that you need a ride out in the hall out there, we'll be glad to arrange one for you, as there are several cars are pulling over there. So please find someone to help give you a ride, and we'll be glad to arrange that. Otherwise, look forward to seeing you at the restaurant.
And any students who are here, special thanks. I know it's fall break, and we just appreciate you all coming out and attending the conference. So thank you so much. Applause for welcoming.
Oh, fill it blank.
Take